Welcome to another installment of our ICCF's Oceans Caucus Foundation Congressional Briefing Series. I'm kind of surprised by the large turnout on a Friday afternoon when no one's in session. And I'm attributing this to one thing, besides the great movie that everybody's interested in watching, including myself. I think it's probably the cupcakes. We do a lot of these cupcake briefings, and I have just declared myself on a new diet. So please do not allow me to be tempted by any of them, and please take them with you when you leave. That's very important to me. Thank you so much for coming. We really have a very interesting program today, and I'm really happy to introduce this group who have put this film together. As many of you know, we've just launched the Oceans Caucus Foundation at a spectacular event with the President of Mexico, the President of Ghana, the Prime Minister of Barbados, and some other dignitaries, and about 60, 70 members of Congress. And we did that last Tuesday, I think it was. The same model that we've taken with ICCF, which is to talk about the importance of conservation to American interests, national security and economic interests, is to create a bipartisan consensus and a consensus among the corporate and NGO communities. That model is what we're also really focusing on in this new Oceans Caucus Foundation program. Listen, everybody knows there are a lot of contentious issues out there for the oceans, but there's a lot of stuff that we as Americans, we as Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives, can't agree on. And we should look at some of those things. We should study those things. We should, because we're talking about our economy, we're talking about our livelihoods, we're talking about jobs, we're talking about our security, and we're talking about American power, which is something I know everybody on the Hill is interested in pushing. So we're very excited to have you all here right after the gala to be our first event after our launch. I've got Karen here from Greenfire Productions, who has put together this film, and she's going to introduce the program today and is going to talk to you all about what the thought process was by putting this video together and what general messages they think it could produce. I'm told it is being shown to sold-out crowds in Boston at IMAX theaters, etc., and that excites me. So I hope this becomes a big blockbuster. Anyway, Karen, thank you so much. Go your way.
Sure. Thanks, John, and thanks so much to the ICCF and the Oceans Caucus Foundation for hosting this Ocean Frontiers Hill briefing today. I'm the producer of Ocean Frontiers, the dawn of a new era in ocean stewardship. And Ocean Frontiers really shows us what's possible when people collaborate and work together. I have 20 years of filmmaking behind me, and I've focused always on sustainability topics. And since February, we released Ocean Frontiers, and we've been, as John mentioned, we've been showing it to audiences from coast to coast, and with a really favorable response from audiences. So I'm really happy today to share a portion of the film with you. And we hope to be holding more of these briefings where we will show other segments, other stories in the film. So Ocean Frontiers tells 4 stories from across the country where people from very different arenas came together to find solutions that benefit their economic interests as well as the ocean. One of the recurring themes that we saw throughout the country, whether we were in Massachusetts Bay, the Florida Keys, in Iowa and the Gulf of Mexico, or along the southern Oregon coast, was collaboration. We saw scientists working with fishermen, industry working with the conservation community, ocean stakeholders across the board, working with government agencies and private landowners, and everybody working to find a solution that would work for everyone, for their economic interests as well as for the ocean. So what we're going to show you today is the Iowa and Gulf of Mexico segment, and I'm really honored to let you know that we have two of the people from the film with us who will come up with me afterwards to respond to your questions. Bill Northey, who's the Secretary of Agriculture for the state of Iowa, as well as Bill Walker, who's from the Gulf of Mexico Alliance. So this story is 23 minutes long, and it shows the relationship between Iowa farmers and what they're doing to reduce their impact on the Gulf of Mexico and increase ocean health in the Gulf of Mexico. So thanks again for joining us today, and again, we'll be here to answer your questions afterwards. Thank you.
When I was a boy, I believed that the sea was boundless and indestructible to human pressures. Now I know better. Most of the biggest fish have been harvested, and there are places where jellyfish have become the catch of the day.
Everybody says, put it out there. Who cares what happens out there? Let's just get it out of my sight.
Most of the world's coral reefs are bleached or dying. There are dead zones the size of small states off our coasts. And all at a time when we have to deal with aquaculture, wind and wave energy, even oil and gas exploration that are staking claims in our waters. But I have also learned there's a smarter, more lasting course than the one we're on.
America's ocean, incomparable cradle of life. The ocean gives us food and fuel, wealth and health, places to play, places to work. Today we need our ocean more than ever, and never has the ocean more needed our help in return. To carry out a new, far-sighted strategy for sustaining the country's ocean, coasts, and Great Lakes, people from shore to shore are now coming together with a fresh approach, a more collaborative approach toward a more lasting relationship with the sea.
So we have things that happen right here in Iowa that end up affecting folks thousands of miles away, fishermen trying to fish in the Gulf of Mexico.
Shipping is extremely important to this economy. 1 in 8 jobs in Southern California is associated with the port activity, and then nationwide it's between 3 and 4 million jobs. So I see marine spatial planning as a tool that will help ports delineate the area where traditional maritime uses are going to be protected.
Scientific research.
Do we need it?
We're finally getting it, thanks to our reserve.
If it's not too late.
No, it's not too late.
I said if.
Yes, it's not.
To meet some of the ocean pioneers, we will journey from coast to coast, as well as the land between. From the fishing community of Port Orford, Oregon, to farmers along the Mississippi River, to the Gulf of Mexico. From divers in the Florida Keys, to whale researchers and industrial shippers in Massachusetts Bay. All are now practicing a new philosophy of marine stewardship, of prosperity through preservation. The Gulf of Mexico, terminus of America's mightiest river, incomparable cradle of life, drawing millions of migrating birds, and the nation's greatest nursery of fish. Yet after decades of neglect, the Gulf has come to symbolize loss. Twice, it has recently served as bullseye for the costliest hurricane and the largest oil spill in U.S. history. Its longer history describes a more insidious decay, its wetlands vanishing by the minute, its waters seasonally rendered dead for lack of oxygen. The insults to the Gulf come from all quarters. Dredges and channels have diverted the mighty and muddy Mississippi away from the wetlands they once nourished. A gauntlet of industries and cities lining the river's banks have discharged their pollutants, destroying the marsh's seafood nurseries, expanding the dead zone to record size. But just as there are many to blame for the demise of America's greatest coastal wetland, so too there are many rescues now underway to reverse it. One in particular comes from an unlikely team of people in an unlikely place.
My name is Dennis Freest. I'm at Radcliffe, Iowa, Central Iowa. We have a family farm operation. We have about 1,450 acres of row crops, and we farrow to finish about 4,500 pigs a year, and we also finish an additional 5,000 feeder pigs a year.
Iowa is blessed with some of the most productive soils in the world. Iowa's farmers produce 23 million acres of row crops, mostly corn and soybeans. Almost every acre is put to use producing food and energy.
Some people say, well, what does Iowa have to do with the Gulf of Mexico or the ocean anyway? And we say, well, about 200 million gallons every minute. The Mississippi River has a drainage from 31 states. What happens in Iowa, what happens in Nebraska, in Idaho, in West Virginia, that happens to the ocean. There's an enormous impact.
Once covered by tall grass prairie and roamed by millions of bison, the Midwest now is a highly modified landscape of industrial agriculture. This new monoculture of row crops releases great quantities of excess nutrients in the form of nitrogen and phosphorus that now washes from Midwestern soils by way of the Mississippi River to the Gulf of Mexico. Here, these nutrients create immense blooms of algae, whose decaying masses deplete the ocean water of oxygen, every year creating a dead zone the size of Massachusetts, a hypoxic zone that suffocates nearly everything in its path.
So we have things that happen right here in Iowa that end up affecting folks thousands of miles away, fishermen trying to fish in the Gulf of Mexico. As we start to figure out how to do a better job, we can lessen that amount of phosphorus that leaves our farms and lessen that amount of nitrogen that leaves our farms. It isn't easy to do as you look at that water wanting to carry those products, but it's something that we can do and been starting to improve, and I think we have some more that we can get done on that. To witness firsthand what it was they were hoping to save,
a group of Iowa farmers, led by Secretary of Agriculture Bill Northey, boarded a southbound bus and followed their Mississippi River downstream to its meeting with the Gulf of Mexico.
I've been doing this for 20 years. I don't think I've had Iowa farmers on the boat. I've had just about everybody else, from rock stars to country music singers to Oklahoma tourists, but no Iowa farmers.
Taking the bait, but not taking the hook.
It won't go back. Wow. And you push it, and that's what I call a trigger fish.
I'm basically a fish out of water down here, aren't I? Interesting experience.
I guess I didn't realize the value of it as far as the fishing industry and that sort of thing. How important it is.
If someone had asked me a year or so ago if I would be working with the Commissioner of Agriculture for the state of Iowa and taking him out on a boat this past weekend, I would have said no. There's no way that's going to be happening, but it is, and that's a good thing.
Okay, so you're holding back here?
Yes, sir, right here behind us.
Wow, they are. Sandy field.
Got them?
Rough field to them? Yeah.
It shows that people throughout this country understand that we need to work together to solve problems that extend well beyond the boundaries of our state. The resources that we manage, our fish, our shrimp, they don't know where state lines are.
The governors of the 5 states bordering the Gulf of Mexico came to realize that each of their economic futures hinged on the health of the same ecological system. Their agreement to preserve that system became the Gulf of Mexico Alliance.
Basically try to move from a system of state-by-state governance of the Gulf of Mexico to one on a more regional basis. And we've extended that partnership up into the watershed of the Mississippi River. And we focused on Iowa first because they were very proactive in their desire to work with us to ultimately reduce nutrient input into the Mississippi River watershed and hopefully reduce or eliminate not only the dead zone that forms every summer off the Texas and Louisiana coast, but also to improve oxygen conditions throughout the Gulf. We're talking about not just doing things differently when you get on your tractor or in your pickup truck in Iowa. We're talking about thinking about things differently.
I guess the catalyst that got me going on that was there was money available, funding available in this program that if I reduced my nitrogen 50 pounds the acre and I lost yield, they would reimburse me for the yield that I lost. So I had a no-lose situation.
One of the farmers' innovative experiments is aiming to lighten their heavy reliance on fertilizer. The entrepreneurial Dennis Friest was one of the first farmers to take the leap, reducing his fertilizer dose substantially.
And we weren't losing any yield. So it was really an eye-opener to say that we are being told by our retailers and industry that we need so much nitrogen to produce a bushel of corn. We're finding out that that was on the high side and that extra pounds we were putting out were actually going to waste and we're ending up in the Gulf of Mexico in the Hypoxia zone.
Number one, it's about the environment, but number two, it's also about economics. We're not leaching that nutrient away. We use less to get more, and we use less, which makes the bottom line for us a lot better. It leaves dollars in our pockets.
Iowa's commitment to reduce their total farmland runoff by 45% will take additional efforts beyond using less fertilizer. Much of Iowa's rain-fed cropland is engineered to drain water as fast as possible. Water invariably laden with nitrogen and phosphorus and headed for trouble in the Gulf. Those out to stop the flood of farmland runoff into the Mississippi are now building a series of enormous organic filters, otherwise known as wetlands.
Right now we're developing what's called nutrient reduction wetlands. We've got about 70 of those on the ground now. And these wetlands are placed below a farming watershed, and that water then sits in these wetlands for a short period of time. Those wetlands reduce the amount of nitrogen in that water. As that water leaves, it has 40 to 70% less nitrogen than it did as it came in.
All of these sites are on private lands. It's been very popular in Iowa, and we actually have a 2-year waiting list of landowners waiting to proceed with restorations of wetlands on their lands.
This area here, when it's flooded with water, will be, what, 27 to 37 acres, something like that?
It's got the...
Father and son dairy farmers Doug and Herman DeWall are part of a growing cadre of Iowa farmers turned wetland ambassadors.
It's going to take cooperation from a number of people, as well as state and federal help, to get this off the ground, because we've got to start someplace to get this going. We just can't go to work and start dumping water and have no responsibility or care about other people. We have to, everybody's here. We need to all work on this project.
And there is some places where they may not be able to put one of these in, but maybe we can do a better job here and keep it back more so that the average will be down to where we need to be.
To achieve a 45% reduction in nitrate will require all of the nitrate reduction practices that we currently have available implemented fully across these landscapes to the extent that they're practical, plus about 2,000 to 3,000 of these nitrogen removal wetlands.
It turns out the farmers' workhorse wetlands are serving far higher purposes than mere water filters.
Oh, there they are. That's a pair of trumpeter swans. They came into the area about 3 years ago, the first pair. They've raised several offspring over the last 3 years. And the story was out that they might have been the first pair that nested outside of captivity in Boone County. And they've come back 3 years in a row, so I'm pretty proud of them. I've always thought that we got to do everything we can do to try to keep everything rolling and working, even if it's down in New Orleans. If it's our fault, we want to fix it.
Building on little contributions from lots of people, Iowa's farmland fixes have begun to evolve. From simple engineering solutions for nitrogen to an ecological integration of Iowa's native prairie.
And some of the major grasses like Indian grass here. This is another one of the tall grass prairie species that really is responsible for building organic matter that made our Iowa soils ideal for farming.
The Iowa waters feeding the Mississippi were once filtered not only by native wetlands, but also by native tallgrass prairie, a natural safeguard since jettisoned by Iowa's new monoculture ecology. So it has become a natural question for landscape ecologist Matt Helmers to ask if tallgrass prairie could once again protect the waters of the Mississippi.
And one of the things is that people that walk their land, that understand their land, they know where water flows and they know where they might need the most protection. And really then it's trying to get species that are diverse, that maybe were native to that area, get those planted in that location to reducing that flow of water, the rate of flow, and reducing some of the contaminants or nutrients that are in that water before it flows downstream.
Planting strips of native tallgrass prairie is another promising method to fight the suffocating hypoxia more than 1,000 miles away. This collaboration between Iowa State University, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service shows that these prairie strips provide significant local benefits as well, keeping soil and nutrients on the farm while creating wildlife habitat.
If these practices were adopted broadly, imagine the landscape with strips and borders and boundaries that include diverse prairie, and suddenly we have corridors built into the ag landscape for wildlife. We have corridors that prevent water from being polluted unduly.
The first test strips of integrating native prairie in between cornfields yielded astonishing results. Prairie strips can provide a level of benefits no one expected.
So we saw about a 90 to 95% reduction in that first year in sediment loss, and we saw about a 85 to 90% reduction in total nitrogen and total phosphorus loss with that surface runoff water.
Fewer tons of fertilizer, more acres of wetlands and prairie. All are lightening Iowa's agricultural burden on the Gulf of Mexico without burdening the returns of Iowa's farmers.
If you're interested in keeping your farm where the farm's supposed to be and not washing away, this is an excellent program, and I highly recommend it. If you like wildlife, if you're thinking about conservation, give it a thought. Really give it a thought.
He's a fighter.
Got one, huh?
Got a fish on coming here. He's a big one, I think.
Oh yeah, that's good size red.
How big is he?
Yeah, he looks about.
We need a healthy marine environment, and we need resilient coastlines. Increasing water quality, decreasing nutrient introduction, increasing and restoring and improving habitat function, all of those things build toward a healthy marine environment. And they don't need to come at the cost of economic development.
The important thing is that the ecosystem retains its resilience, its ability to survive. And that goes also for the people who live along the coasts. We want resilient communities. We want communities that can withstand floods, withstand hurricanes, withstand other threats that may occur and still survive. And so if our human communities, if our animal communities, can be resilient, that's the most important thing.
If we can carry out the plans that we have put in place now, we will achieve those goals. And 20, 25 years from now, we'll be able to look back and say, boy, we really did a good thing.
Okay, we plan to do a question and answer. Please, as I said, if you are leaving or would like another cupcake, grab one. So when we have the 2 or 3 of you all to come up and do question and answer, do we have this microphone on? We could talk about the film, we could talk about oceans in general, people can comment, tell us what you're doing during the weekend, whatever.
So here's, we have Dr. Walker, who is with the Gulf of Mexico Alliance, and he's also the executive director at, in Mississippi for the Marine Resources Department. And Secretary Bill Northey, he's the Secretary of Iowa from, Secretary of Agriculture from the state of Iowa. And he's got a number of other great things that he is doing. He's also the president of the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, and he is the co-chair of the Gulf of Mexico Hypoxia Task Force. So I want to join me in thanking them for coming out here today and joining us. And they're truly inspiring work. I have to say that when we show the film, this segment is what everybody afterwards comes up to me and says, I cannot believe what's going on in Iowa and what those Iowa farmers are doing. And I had no idea that our impacts inland so affected the health of our oceans. Yes.
If somebody lost their phone, smartphone, what's expensive? Just put it in the back there, outside. Somebody will come up the back door.
I have a question for the Secretary. How large is the program in Iowa in terms of farmer participation and budget?
Yeah, so as far as how many folks are participating, we've got several different pieces. And you saw there are a lot of different examples. In some cases, the wetland program works really well. We've got, as was mentioned, 70 wetlands out there. Each wetland is about 10 acres. It covers about 7,000 acres worth of land above that filters through those 70 wetlands, or 70,000 acres, 1,000 acres per wetland. 70,000 acres through those wetlands. Again, now we're talking about a landscape that has, in Iowa we have 23 million acres of cropland. So it's a very small portion of it, and in many cases you won't have wetlands that can sit, that the drainage tile can feed into and surface into that. But then you have other programs where you look at timing of nitrogen application. That program is primarily run by the Iowa Soybean Association. It's an on-farm network. They do testing before and after. They put strips across the field, and farmers are able to look at what rates work for them, maybe how the year was different. There's several hundred farmers that are part of that program. That's across many thousands of acres as well. We have some of these Iowa State studies that were done looking at the buffer strips in certain areas, and they've got some others that are looking at within tile lines putting in wood chips or corn cobs that will absorb the nitrogen going through those tile lines. Several of those projects. In total, it's very small compared to the total amount of water that's leaving the state, but it's a start. And part of our effort in doing this and taking farmers down the Mississippi was to get the visibility of the work up and the need and engaging folks. And I think we've got a lot more folks engaged doing these activities and asking about these activities than what were engaged 2 or 3 or 5 years ago. But we've got a long ways to go before we're making any kind of a significant impact, a way to get to that 45% reduction. One of the things we're doing right now is we're doing some research with Iowa State, and we're coming up with a non-point source strategy. So we're looking at 45% reduction of nitrogen and phosphorus from the non-point sources, the fields out there. And then our Department of Natural Resources doing the point sources, the cities, the sewage treatment plants, all voluntary, and what it would take to get a 45% reduction. We'll have that plan out by this summer. We'll have expenses, what kind of costs would there be to that? How much risk is there to farmers in lower nitrogen rates or different timings on nitrogen? What kinds of costs are there in cover crops, other kinds of things? But we're at the place where we now will have that out, and that'll be a strategy for the whole state. And it'll be completely voluntary because different operations in different locations in the state need different things. But it'll be a way to engage a lot more folks, and part of this was a lead-in to get more people engaged and ready for when that came. So right now it's a very small portion. Each of these are very small compared to where they need to be, but they're ramping up and being able to get people's attention and get a lot more folks involved.
Could you also identify yourself and what office you're from?
Sure. Ellen Tyler with Sam Farr's office. And I was just going to ask, those conservation programs that you're talking about, are those USDA federally funded working land programs?
Yeah, primarily. So the program with the wetlands is a Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. Each state has a different CREP program, and in ours it's focused on water quality and nitrogen reduction. Other states will have buffer strips, other kinds of pieces, and ours specifically had research in it to find out what percentage nitrogen reduction we could get from those wetlands. But then the other pieces, like the Iowa State research that's being done there, that would be done through probably state-funded research. The Iowa Soybean Association dollars are their checkoff dollars, farmer dollars that are checkoff. Some of the money for the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program that comes from the state is actually funded by an act that went into place back in 1987 that is a tax on fertilizer, and a small portion of that money goes towards matching those federal dollars that are used. We have state cost share programs, primarily focused, historically, most of our conservation programs are focused on soil erosion, which addresses phosphorus because that's where most of the phosphorus is going to come from, connected to soil. But it does not address nitrogen. And nitrogen is a completely different animal because it will connect to the water as opposed to the soil. And so we're not near as far along in figuring out how to control the nitrogen that leaves the farms. And so a lot of our work has been done on that conservation. We have state cost share programs. We spend about $7 million a year of state money to put in conservation practices, and the farmers then match that with about $14 million to put in those state practices. But then we also have cost share programs in the federal level, EQIP and others as well. And we have about 1.6 million acres of CRP programs with about 600,000 acres in Iowa that is a continuous enrollment CRP buffer strips that are focused specifically in those areas that could keep some of that soil out of water as well. So it's a mix.
Okay, do we have any other questions? I'm sure, oh, right there.
Is there any coordination with Minnesota being such a close partner? Renee Doyle, Congresswoman Bachmann's office, but I actually live in southern Minnesota. But I just wondered, is Iowa coordinating in this effort with the university of the two universities or anything between Minnesota and Iowa, since we're both kind of along the same, doing the same thing?
Yeah, a little bit. And we see the most coordination in local water quality projects. So some of our dollars go to these bigger efforts, and then some are focused back to individual water quality projects. I live in northwest Iowa, Okoboji area up there, and our watershed is also into Minnesota, and we share a water quality project where both states do that. But it's not really the states working together, it's more that project that's working together. Some of the research that we've used to figure out how we could get nitrogen reductions is research that was done in Minnesota. And so we'll look at comparable research. We don't necessarily use research from Oregon or other places because the soils are different, the rainfall is different, and those kinds of things. But we do look where there are comparable circumstances and we can learn from the research that's being done. So we could do a lot better than what we're doing, but a little bit.
Thank you. I'm Bill Millen from the Nature Conservancy. I work exclusively on international stuff, but I find this fascinating. And I have a question down at the Gulf of Mexico end. Is there long-term monitoring in place? What are the trend lines on these products as the, per acre foot of water or however you measure it?
The overall trend over the years continues to go in the wrong direction. It's going up. But the hypoxic area that we talk about off of Texas and Louisiana varies in size from year to year. A couple of years ago, it was the largest it's ever been, and then last year it was a little bit smaller than normal. This summer, we just don't know what that's going to be. But more important than the dead zone that is identified and focused on is the fact that oxygen levels throughout the northern part of the Gulf of Mexico are lower than they need to be. They're not hypoxic. They're not low enough to kill the animals that happen to be in there, but they're not as productive as they could be where oxygen levels up higher. So it's a long-term situation. It's been going on a long time. You mentioned that the Gulf has been a neglected sort of an area. And it has been, and the recent major disasters like Katrina and the oil spill have drawn attention to the Gulf, and that's a good thing that came out of some bad things. But those things are just events. They have a start and they have a finish, and then you move on. The more insidious things are the things that we continue to do on a daily basis to our great water bodies like the Gulf of Mexico, and nutrient introduction is one of those things. So, and I'll just tell you while Bill's here that this would not have happened in Iowa without Bill Northey. Bill Northey was in a, most commissioners of agriculture of states have better things to do than fool around with a bunch of rednecks from Mississippi, But he took this as a project that was very important to him, and now as the chairman of the National Association of Agricultural Commissioners, he's encouraging his counterparts and throughout the watershed of the Mississippi to follow the steps of Iowa. So I think, this is the beginning of something that eventually is going to be really, really a good thing.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for coming. If anybody has anything to say afterwards, please stay. I know our panels will probably be around for a few minutes, and have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.